Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this important discussion on moving from disaster management to disaster resilience, risk management. Thank you for joining us both in person and online. When we think about disasters, we think about their catastrophic effects on our built space, on our natural endowment. We think about the impacts on debt management, economic loss, and most of all on human life. We have to distinguish between building for resilience or the management of risk and crisis response. Today, that's the theme that we'll explore. We'll explore how and when we can shift toward this risk management approach, recognizing two things. First, for those crises that can be anticipated or predicted with sufficient confidence, prevention is more cost-effective than reaction is. In such cases, every dollar spent, as you saw on the video before, on prevention can save $4 in recovery. Not every disaster can be prevented, and it is increasingly difficult for families or for economies to insure against this growing set of natural disasters. When governments do need to respond, those instruments that are characterized by speed and effectiveness are the ones that we value most. The multilateral community is uniquely positioned to help in this space. We are built to intermediate. We intermediate in capital markets so that we can pass along long-term affordable finance, and we intermediate in knowledge so we can share global understanding, financial innovation, and regional experience as we step in to help prepare for and respond to the major events of the region. As the multilateral centered in Latin America and Caribbean, a region that is uniquely vulnerable to natural disasters, we take this responsibility to heart. The IDB is strengthening its commitment to resilience with a new risk management action plan focused on better risk assessment, governance, prevention, preparedness, and financial protection. And as part of our annual meeting, we will launch a risk management program called Ready and Resilient Americas. When the Romantic poet William Wordsworth wrote about nature, he noted, "The world is too much with us, late and soon." 220 years later, it feels like we are living through this reality. Weather events that were regular and manageable are becoming increasingly intense and damaging, and those that were once devastating but rare are now occurring with greater frequency. With both the variables of frequency and intensity in flux, the structure of aligning all of our instruments and responses according to that structure isn't sufficient anymore, not sufficient as a planning tool for financial recovery or for preparedness. During any crisis, discount rates skyrocket and all forms of financing converge. That's why families in stress turn to loan sharks or casas de empeño, to pawn shops when they need emergency financing. Any money at any cost will do when your roof has been blown off. But when we plan financially, countries can hedge against this extraordinary spike in costs. At the IDB, we help to do this. We do this through investment loans to build resilient infrastructure. We do it through policy loans to address pricing and regulation, to set the conditions for investments in adaptation and resilience across infrastructure sectors, housing and construction, agriculture and tradable sectors. Do it through capital market instruments so public and private bond issuers can finance the cost of building a resilient economy. This includes debt for resilient swaps, for example, that the use IDB guarantees. We provide instruments that offer resources after an event, emergency recovery loans, liquidity, and budget support instruments. And we offer insurance-like products that encourage preparation with financial resources that are held for response to crises. I'm going to shut off my phone for now. One of you is going to have to remind me to turn it back on because I'm actually going to receive your questions through my telephone. I'm not here checking my email. I want you to know from the outset. We offer insurance-like products that encourage preparation with financial resources that are held until they can respond to crises, such as contingent credit facilities and catastrophic drawdown options. And we offer financial contractual clauses that embed debt sustainability and incentives into these products. Climate resilient debt suspension clauses that can suspend debt payments until after a crisis, and our CLIMA products that can be used to exchange ex-ante commitments to resilience for reduced payments later. Each of these instruments is critical to risk management and resilience. They spread risk over time and across economic players. They reduce the cost of borrowing for vulnerable countries. They incentivize resilient construction. And most importantly, they establish verifiable commitments to sustainable investment, policies, and regulations. That's the impact side of the financial engineering. Today's panel will discuss the tools to get us to greater disaster risk management, from early warning systems and resilience-linked bonds to private sector engagement, the role of insurance and reinsurance, and financial protection tools. Opening our discussion is Elizabeth Riley, a recognized leader in disaster risk management throughout the Caribbean. She's Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, and has been at the forefront of regional disaster preparedness, response coordination, and risk reduction efforts. Under Elizabeth's leadership, CDEMA has strengthened early warning systems, improved resilience financing, and has led rapid response efforts to major hurricanes and other crises. I'm looking forward very much to hearing the framing that Elizabeth is going to provide for us, and I'd like to invite her up to the podium to help us to launch our panel. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Thank you very much, Jordan, and good morning, colleagues. First, I want to say a special thanks to the IDB for inviting CDEMA to be a part of this very important conversation on transforming disaster management to disaster resilience. In the presentation this morning, I want to touch on 4 things: to say a little bit about CDEMA, my organization, to explain the complex and ever-changing multi-hazard environment which faces us in our region, to speak on how we define resilience and how we're pursuing resilience, and then a few thoughts on how we go forward. So CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, is an institution of the Caribbean community. We have quite a big geographical space, and 20 participating states are members. But what is critical is that our region has a lot of diversity. Diversity in the geography, diversity in the capacities, as well as the capabilities of our states. And it's the latter that drives our commitment to horizontal cooperation and supporting each other on the road to resilience. The work of the institution is quite diverse, and I won't go into all the specifics of it, but just to say that we have an overarching mandate which looks at resilience in all its dimensions, and I'll speak to that a little further in the presentation. So a key question is, what are we building resilience to? And within the Caribbean, as the second most vulnerable region in the world to hazards, we face a multiplicity of natural, technological, as well as biological hazards. And the hazards are changing. On the side of climate, we're seeing new hazards such as heat, excess heat, and also tornadoes, which have started to affect our region, and previously these did not exist. But a real critical component of all of these changes is related to climate risk, and climate risk which is driven by climate change. And these are statistics that everyone knows. All of the climate parameters are changing. The critical ones are trending upwards, including temperatures, sea level rise, and also ocean temperatures. And even though that's the picture at the global scale, when we downscale it to the Caribbean context, it presents itself in some interesting dynamics with respect to the hazards. We're seeing changes in the rainfall in terms of intensities, sea level rise, which is affecting our coastlines and impacting key economic sectors like tourism. We also have situations of intensifying tropical cyclones, and you would have seen Hurricane Beryl last year. The earliest Category 5 hurricane on a record took place last year, happened in July, very early July, very unusual. But we're also seeing significant implications for climate-sensitive sectors in our region, which are both social as well as economic. And it's not just on the large systems like the cyclones, but we're also seeing more significant severe weather events and more intense and frequent severe weather events as well. So as the climate impacts increase, so too do our damage and losses. And these are statistics that we see all the time in the Caribbean. Realities of 200, 300% of our GDP in terms of damage and losses. And of course, this is very debilitating for the economic situation in our states. So we've sought to redefine resilience in our region. So we do not only speak about bouncing back to the state which we were in prior to the impacts, but we're talking a lot more now about bouncing forward. In other words, trying to make things a lot better, much more resilient, so that the next time the hazards impact, the damage and the losses would be reduced. To do so, we have articulated a higher level regional strategy, which is focused on resilience building. It's our Regional Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy, or CDM. And it's strongly aligned with the Sendai framework, and in fact is the region's vehicle for delivering on the Sendai framework and aligned to the 2030 agendas. Importantly also, the heads of government in 2017 asked CDEMA to answer an important question. What does resilience mean in the context of our CARICOM states? And we got together with our states, a number of our partners, including the Caribbean Development Bank and others, to articulate a Caribbean resilience pathway in 2018, which is built on 5 key pillars and bolstered by an enabling framework. I won't go into the details of the enabling framework in the presentation, but I'll say a little bit about some of those pillars. So first of all is social protection. And social protection is key because disasters impact people differently. And in the Caribbean, we have demographic changes happening where a high percentage of our population is now elderly. We have persons who are differently abled, children, migrants, whether documented or undocumented. From the perspective of the disaster risk management, we see people. And what it means is that while we can pre-identify vulnerable groups ahead of events, what we're also experiencing is livelihood impacts, which renders persons in a marginal position where when livelihoods are lost, these persons also require support from the state. And it has caused us to really look at building greater flexibility into social protection systems in post-disaster situations, which can treat some of these dynamics. Economic opportunities and enhancement of these is also critical. And there are many different dimensions of this, but I'll mention the diversification of financing sources. This is absolutely key. We know it's important at the national level to have investment through national level budgets for disaster risk reduction, and also to look at a diverse suite of options, including catastrophe bonds. We have in the region also the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, or the CRIF SBC, which is a very unique risk transfer mechanism. But we also need to pivot towards new sources of finance, which include private sector, we're going to talk about that today, but also private foundations, international non-governmental organizations. These do have to come into the mix along with non-traditional partners. On the climate and disaster risk intersection, this is an important topic. We also feel that it is important for there to be critical strategies at the national level for grant financing, how we manage grant financing, and also centralize the application of grant financing around national economic development priorities. So these are all topics which we've been discussing and trying to move forward. Innovation is key in terms of looking at different mechanisms. Some of our countries have set up disaster risk management funds to offset some of these critical costs. And of course, sectoral resilience is an important part of the economic opportunity enhancement. Also important is the area of infrastructure. So in our region, we experience a lot of losses as a result of hazard impacts to infrastructure. And the areas that we are seeking to approach here are related to how do we modify our decisions on planning, in terms of location of critical infrastructure, but also, as you can see from the photo on the far left, it's important that when we're talking about green technologies, green energies, renewable energies, that we're also designing in a way which is going to be resilient to the hazards that we face in the region. Operational readiness and recovery is the final area that I'll touch on. So because the hazards are changing, because we're having more frequent occurrences of hazards, it means that we're going to be responding more. And so in the Caribbean, we view operational readiness, our ability to prepare and to respond to hazards, as a critical building block of the resilience conversation. And we believe that it's an area that requires significant investment as well. We also are very much focused on the area of recovery. For CDEMA, this is a new functional area which we've integrated into the work of the agency, and we're very much focused on investment in ex-ante recovery capacity building, understanding what are those recovery frameworks that we should pursue, who leads on recovery, how do we nest it within the work of our ministries of economic development and finance, but also integrating a multi-sectoral approach so all sectors, social and economic, are aware of how they're support. So in terms of final thoughts, I think it is important to keep people at the center. The work that we do when we discuss resilience, it's really about people. And it's important to always keep our eyes on what is happening with respect to people and how do we make the lives of people better. We also believe that building resilience is a strategic imperative for our region, but also globally. We are very much managing the evolution of the geopolitics and the uncertainty which continues to emerge around this. And particularly in the Caribbean, we have seen implications at the national level in terms of availability of financing for supporting preparedness and response actions, but also at the regional level, including related to access to scientific and technological information and a stemming of the natural integration that takes place between scientific and technical institutions, and these are absolutely necessary if we're going to solve some of the challenges around resilience. And this is really pointing to a need to upscale national and regional capacity and capabilities. More and more, we believe that regions are going to have to rely on themselves more and do more for themselves. And in the Caribbean, we're very much committed to this. And of course, there's an issue of leadership. And it's important that we all show up in the spaces where we operate and the areas where we influence, because resilience is the cornerstone to building every aspect of development. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute, and I very much look forward to the discussions.
Okay, with Sachiko Imoto. And ask a little bit about what JICA is doing in the region. We think of Japan, I think everybody here and online knows of Japan as a country not only susceptible to disasters, earthquakes, tsunami, and weather events, but also as a country that's developed extraordinary capacity to manage, to predict, and to respond, and to build resilience in that process. So JICA has been the interface, if I understand, between Japan's experience and the support that much of the rest of the world asks for from Japan. Could you, given that experience, that background, could you give us a little idea of what strategies and plans JICA has for disaster risk management in the cooperation that it provides, and specifically for Latin America and the Caribbean, what kind of strategic cooperation JICA carries out?
Thank you, Jordan, for your kind introduction, and I'm extremely pleased to be here on the panel for this important discussions of disaster risk management in the Latin America and the Caribbean. As you said, that Japan has faced numerous natural disasters throughout its history. From earthquakes to typhoons and other kinds of natural disasters, we have learned firsthand devastating impact of these events on our lives. But we have also learned valuable lessons which have shaped our disaster risk management policies and technologies. JICA has been a strong advocate for the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. The framework, led by Japan, is built on 4 key priorities. 1, understanding disaster risk. 2, strengthening disaster risk governance. 3, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And lastly, enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So in order to support these priorities, JICA has adopted a three-pronged approach. First, we strongly promote pre-disaster investment, especially in urban areas where human and economic capital concentrate. Strengthening flood control infrastructure, landslide protection, and quake-resistant infrastructure are crucial to minimizing risks and economic losses. Second, we help continuously develop strong disaster risk management systems. This includes capacity building for disaster management agencies and professionals, supporting disaster management planning, and improving disaster risk observation, statistical analysis, and so on. Third, we emphasize the Build Back Better approach. After disaster strike, reconstruction must not only restore what was lost, but also enhance resilience to future risks. This means smarter rebuilding efforts, improved infrastructure, and forward-looking disaster prevention measures. Latin America and the Caribbean are the key regions where JICA is actively involved in disaster risk management. Like Japan, the region is prone to natural disasters such as earthquakes and hurricanes. This is why we believe that Japan's experience can contribute significantly to disaster risk management efforts in the region. Countries such as Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Colombia have a long history of cooperation with us in disaster reduction, and we are actively implementing triangular cooperation with these partner countries. We believe that this type of learning and network among disaster management agencies and professionals and stakeholders in the region will be very effective in promoting risk management. In Latin America and the Caribbean, where economic development is progressing, we would also like to expand pre-disaster investment in structural and non-structural measures so that actually the losses can be reduced. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sachiko-san. I think we'll turn to Daniel Cole from the World Meteorological Organization. Daniel's going to test us all afterwards to see how we pronounced meteorological. The WMO has initiated two key programs aimed at enhancing forecasts, right, and improving our ability to save lives in the region. And we were hoping that you might give us a little bit of background on these two programs, impact forecasting, early warning systems. Is there anything can you give us a framework and explain a little bit of how the WMO entered into these areas and what we can expect to benefit from them?
Sure, and thank you very much, Jordan, for having me here. First of all, the WMO is a member organization of 193 countries represented by their national meteorological and hydrological agencies. So we work together globally to strengthen and support high-capacity observation networks, forecasting, and warning systems. In 2022, the UN Secretary-General Guterres launched Early Warnings for All with the ambition to make sure everyone on the planet was served by early warning systems by 2027 or as soon as possible thereafter. It's a big ambition. The WMO is co-leading this together with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, and we work with other key partners, including the International Telecommunications Union and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies, to bring a holistic guidance across the value chain from observations to early warning delivery to preparedness. This is a global initiative, but of course it's really up to the countries and the regions to push it forward. We, as one of the co-leads, we're there to provide technical guidance and assistance, but we need all hands on deck. I think we heard earlier from Elizabeth that everyone has a role to play, and we need everyone pushing in the same direction. In Latin America and the Caribbean, there's already at least 4 countries that have launched their early warnings for all programs and completed roadmaps. So it includes Antigua, Barbuda, Barbados, Ecuador, Guatemala. Guyana will launch theirs in May. Haiti just last week approved their roadmap, and Belize is also launching in May. So there's a lot of happening here and a lot of countries stepping up to the plate, which is great. And we're here to support all of the countries who want to take this forward. There's also regional exchange. There was a multi-stakeholder forum held last December in St. Kitts and Nevis to bring together all of the countries in the region, as well as the partners to work towards a common goal of early warning systems. Now, under that, we have impact-based forecasting as a key component of successful early warnings. And impact-based forecasting really forces institutions who have hazard information to work together with institutions with vulnerability information so that our forecasts and ultimately our warnings are actionable and actually are able to convey information about what the weather is going to do, not just what the weather is going to be. So what I mean by this, think if I told you that tomorrow the pressure is going to be 1,000 hectopascals, so what? Who cares? What does that mean to the normal person? But if I told you tomorrow that the wind will be strong enough to blow over a truck on the highway, then you can start thinking, that's an issue I need to deal with. Who needs to be involved? What do we have to do to avoid that impact? So that's what impact-based forecasting is all about. We see a lot of progress in the region there too. Just last week, Turks and Caicos launched their first emergency alert news feed, which uses something called CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol, which is a global standard to issue impact-based early warnings. So it's really part of the early warning chain, but what's critical to impact-based forecasting and warning is that institutions work together, because not just one institution can do it. We need all hands on deck again.
That's great. That's kind of a nice segue into a question that we were going to pose to Ruben Hofliger from Swiss Re. All hands having to work together. You're kind of the voice of the private sector here, obviously the reinsurance industry, and with that encapsulates so much, both on the investment side, on the insurance side, and the interface with businesses, families, households that need the protection that insurance can offer. Recently, we've seen tremendous pressure on the reinsurance industry, if I understand correctly. Just punishing series of major events, wildfires in the U.S., last year's storms. Can you give us a sense of what strategies are being considered in the insurance and reinsurance industries to address this kind of increasing frequency of large-scale events where we break down this sort of frequency type of event that we used to be able to imagine and plan for, and the severity event that was stochastic, ad hoc, but is becoming more and more frequent now?
Of course. So first of all, I would like to thank the IDB for the invitation to participate in this session and be able to share the private sector, the insurance, reinsurance industry perspective on the matter. I would like to start by saying that this should be a joint effort. Public-private partnerships have worked a long way in order to be able to help tackling this type of situations. Climate change is a reality. The increase on the severity and frequency of events is a trend that we are going we are looking that it's just growing and growing, so we all need to work together. The public sector cannot do it by themselves, neither the private sector by itself. We need all to work together. Public sector, private sector, NGOs, the multilateral development banks, and so forth. One of the things that we have seen is that the insurance industry has gathered a lot of data. This is what we do. We are a risk data companies. So what we are offering right now is to also put all the data that we have collected for many years for our own internal purposes of assessment and putting a price on risk, for the population, for the governments to also have access to this information and be able to understand the risks they bear, the risk on a specific location, what type of hazards are you exposed to, earthquake, hurricane, rain, floods, wildfires, but also the frequency and return periods, that's the way we measure the return periods of this type of events in a specific location, a group of locations, for a specific asset, or for a future asset to be built. So you can be prepared to understand that and take the proper measures to reduce the risk, mitigate, and also do the adaptation measures that are needed in order for insurance to be sustainable and affordable. We can't simply expect that we keep growing and building in high-risk zone areas and insurance can take care of all of that. That's not sustainable. So this is one of the first risk insights and data about where the risks are and what are the measures you need to take into account. A second topic, it's about focus on the diversification. We need to create risk awareness among the population, risk awareness among the public sector, the governments, create the right incentives. Because normally what we see, the main problem is that when people are aware they are highly exposed to hurricanes, like in the Caribbean, Florida, or earthquakes in the countries that were mentioned on the Pacific Alliance countries, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Chile, also California, we see a significant amount of insurance penetration. But we also need other areas to be insured. You can only insure bad, what we call bad risks, which is risks that are growing significantly and the severity and frequency is growing. And just to give you a clear example about this topic, last year we had 2 hurricanes impacting the US, Milton and Helene. If you look at the insurance penetration on the Atlantic coast, it is significantly higher than inland, meaning you can see insurance penetration from Florida all the way to New York of 60–70%. But when you look inland, in a specific case of North Carolina, where there was devastating impacts by Hurricane Helene, the insurance penetration in that area, Asheville and those municipalities, were less than 2%. And you're talking about the United States, which is a high developed country. Imagine the situation in our countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So more risk awareness is needed because even though hurricanes are very familiar to people and earthquakes that are what we call secondary perils like floods, wildfires, droughts that are also increasing in severity and frequency, and people need to be aware about it and take measures to reduce, mitigate, but also be protected with insurance, which is what we call insurance to protect large-scale catastrophes, is to cover the residual risk and not to cover frequency.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ruben. I think we'll come back around to Elizabeth, if that's okay. And you laid out some of this in your opening comments. Perhaps you can give us a sense of what you see as the priority issues that are being addressed in the Caribbean right now, and is it sort of still transitioning from this crisis focus to more of a resilience-building agenda?
Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. And I want to also thank my fellow panelists for their interventions. They really resonate with me. So I will speak to 3 things on the Caribbean side to complement the presentation. The first comment is related to finance. And I want to really build on the contribution by Imoto-san, where she talked about the importance of the investment. And in the context of small states, we have to talk about transformational scale investments. So we have been spending money, for example, on early warning systems, as alluded to by Daniel, but we're not seeing the types of changes that we need to see as rapidly as they're required. And as we looked at the statistics from the WMO and also when we downscaled to the work by the Caribbean climate scientists, the pace at which the climate is changing is much faster than the pace at which we're making the investments to build the resilience. And herein lies the challenge. So what we need to look at is the financing mechanisms. Last week, we had the regional consultation for the Green Climate Fund for the Caribbean region in St. Kitts and Nevis. And we were very heartened to hear about the reform that is being undertaken under the GCF, which is intended to allow us to increase access, but also to increase access at scale. And I think these are some of the conversations that we need to have. And it's critically important for small states because I'd alluded to smaller cumulative events. And what happens with the smaller cumulative events is that they don't attract international support, but they're paid for by national governments. It diverts funds from usual development processes, and it also drives countries deeper into debt. So this is a cycle that has to be broken and can only be done by transformational investment. The second comment is on national capacity, and this is a real issue for small states. Those of you who come from small islands like myself know that if we work in governments, and I used to work in the government, I'm a Barbadian, that we carry many hats. And when work is to be done, it's the same persons doing the work every time. So as many partners come to a national government for support or to partner or to develop proposals, it's the same individuals every time. And in addition, we also have a dearth of skill sets, very highly specialized skill sets. So as we're engaging in the conversations on supporting small states in resilience building, we have to integrate into that conversation a discussion on how we're investing in developing national level capacities, but also regional level capacities in instances where it does not make sense for national governments to develop their own skill sets because the resources are just not there, but it can be more appropriate. It just makes better sense to do it from a regional level. The third comment I'll make is on linking into the Sendai framework and the first priority related to understanding the risk. And this continues to be a challenge for small states. So the midterm review of the Sendai framework indicated that this was actually one of the priorities where we were making the least progress. And that was a similar finding for us when we assessed the comprehensive disaster management strategy as well in our own midterm review. And what is happening is that I talked about the complexity of the hazard. So it really calls for a very integrated, data-driven, scientific approach. And I'm really heartened to hear Ruben's indication that the private sector, the insurances sector, is now looking at data sharing. This is going to be absolutely important for small states. So I'll stop there.
That's so helpful. And in your second point, you really highlighted this issue of capacity and skills. So I might turn to Sachiko-san and ask a little bit about JICA's activities and capacity building, specifically the studies and research, the training programs, the experts, how JICA evaluates the results of this and make sure that there's actual impact, since this is kind of the theme that Ruben put out there, and Daniel talking about impact-based forecasting. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk a little bit about impact-based financing, and we can see how we are all focusing on making sure that our work actually has the results, has the impact that we want it to have. Could you give us a sense of how JICA is utilizing its training and its capacity building in this regard?
Thank you, Jordan. As you said, the capacity building is the key in the disaster risk management. And as Elizabeth mentioned, I think it's very important that each national government has its own capacity, but it's also more important to have the regional capacity to support each other or cooperate each other. And JICA's experiences, our support with partner countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, that spans decades. And we are quite extremely happy to see, actually, we have seen a lot of results coming out from our joint cooperation. And actually, the results have firmly taken root in the region. We have seen a lot more capacities in the national government, better disaster risk management government system, and human resources are developed, in the past 40 or 50 years. For example, in Mexico and Peru, JICA had supported the establishment of disaster management centers which now play a crucial role in training professionals across the region, not only in their own countries, but supporting neighboring countries to build their capacities. And in El Salvador, our collaboration led to updates in seismic building codes, ensuring safer infrastructure in the city. And in Chile, our long-standing cooperation in disaster prevention includes the Kizuna project, what we call Kizuna project, and Kizuna means bond in English, and which has trained nearly 6,000 professionals in earthquake engineering, disaster risk reduction, and mitigation in 27 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. This partnership illustrates how knowledge sharing, capacity building, and establishing regional networks can strengthen resilience in the communities and countries. And in the Caribbean, JICA considers regional cooperation through CDEMA is essential in enhancing resilience and risk reduction in the region. Fostering regional cooperation and establishing stronger regional response mechanisms will make the Caribbean more resilient. And in this regard, JICA experts have been dispatched to CDEMA to work together in building capacity in the organization, but also with the member countries, so that the regional network can support any events that might be happening in the region, utilizing the resources more effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Daniel, let me turn to you. In response to requests from countries in the region, we're supporting ourselves an agenda to develop social protection systems that can better respond to shocks. How do you perceive the integration of early warning systems, as you were describing, with shock responsive social protection systems? And what would you see as the main advancements or challenges associated with this integration?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jordan. So I think, it goes back, it hinges on a point I raised earlier and was mentioned by all the speakers, and that's the need for everyone to work together. So if you look at sort of the early warning chain, it all starts with data. And we need data not just from the hydrometeorological space where we're involved, but also from the social protection systems themselves, from the ministries of economy and finance, and so on. All this data has to come together to provide guidance on how social protection systems can be designed to be more rapidly scalable. For us, also, the data is the core of all that we do, and that no matter what we're forecasting or predicting, whether that is the next few hours or days, if you're talking about tornadoes or flash floods, out to a week or beyond that, if you're looking at hurricanes or larger scale floods, and then even seasonal, looking at drought impacts or El Nino impacts, and then finally multi-year, looking far into the future, all those different levels of planning and understanding are hinged on the same data at its core. So I want to stress that the availability of data is critical from all partners, not just from the meteorological and hydrological agencies. This then needs to be translated through these partnerships into actionable information. So obviously for early warning systems, about informing the public and they understand what to do and how to react. For adaptive social protection, I think it also needs to be just as timely, but it needs to be designed specifically to some degree automatically inform the social protection system on how to react or what to be prepared for. Adaptive social protection needs to be able quickly to target or identify beneficiaries that need support and may need support in the coming days, weeks, and months, depending on what hazards are coming down the pike. And I think that is critical, again, that the data we have is translated into an understanding of does the social protection system need to expand horizontally to cover more people, or perhaps also vertically to provide more support to the same people. Without the data and without the partnership to understand the hazards together with the exposure and the vulnerabilities, that's nearly impossible, and you can't do that in a standardized and efficient manner. And of course, all that of information has to then feed into an understanding of the liquidity needs of the social protection system, which is where the risk and the insurance and risk financing sector comes into play. So it's all about partnership. We all have something to add, but we need to find a way to work together to optimize that.
Great, thank you, Daniel. And I think we'll turn to Ruben with this nod on the contribution from finance. Can you give us a sense of what new financial instruments are being developed, or the potential future models of financial instruments in order to address a set of risks, and how the reinsurance industry is part of those or driving the development of those new financial instruments?
Of course. One of the things that have been growing significantly to help increase the financial protection is parametric insurance. And I will give a couple of examples about the relevance of parametric insurance and how this bridges the gap of assets that are not really insurable under traditional formats anymore, or are excluded by traditional insurance. One example is related to nature-based solutions. We all know that nature protects. If the nature is preserved, protected, it becomes a natural barrier against the effects of natural disasters. An example is what we did in Mexico, in the state of Quintana Roo, to protect the Mesoamerican reef cover. It was the first ever parametric insurance cover to protect the reef. Why the reef? Because it's clear and determined that if the reef is healthy, the reef is grown, it will become a natural barrier against the storm surge that impacts the coast when a hurricane is hitting the coast. And then you need to take measures immediately after the impact of the hurricane, actually to maintain, preserve, and restore the reef that was impacted. Because if the reef is dying, then there is no protection to the coast, and since this type of regions are focusedly 100% on tourism, if there is no beaches, there is no commerce, the activity is gone and people have no income. So what we did was to build parametric insurance as a part of a comprehensive disaster risk financing and insurance strategy, which is pillar one, ensure that the reef is protected, ensure there is no overexploitation of the reef, there is no pollution of the water, because if there is pollution, the reef will die. If there is overexploitation, it will also be impacted. Second one is creating a trust fund to pay for the most frequent, less severe hurricane events, which are better to have your self-retention fund to pay for those losses rather than buy risk transfer. And the third pillar was about having a parametric insurance coverage to pay for the most severe, less frequent hurricanes, those that are really making a deep impact on the reef and on the affected area, and you need resources immediately to attend. What does it mean? It means training the local community as brigades to go out there, collect the broken pieces of the reef, and take them to nursery, and plant them back on the reef, so the reef won't die and will continue having this absorbance of the storm surge. So this comprehensive strategy is a really nice story about how can you preserve and protect. A second one is about the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico, which is responsible for the pyramids, all the ancient ruins in Mexico, the old churches. After the 2017 earthquake, they were not able to buy insurance, traditional insurance anymore. Why? Because they didn't have proper data. Going back to the data, they didn't have granular, sufficient data about all the assets allocated across the seismic zones of Mexico. If you don't have detailed information about the asset, where is the asset located? What is the total value of the asset? What is the exposure it has to the different perils? It's very difficult to put a price on risk on traditional insurance format. So parametric on the difference, the parametric insurance is not really covering the asset per se, but is more covering the probability of the occurrence, a next type of event, an earthquake, a hurricane, a flood. So with that, the INA was able, the National Institute was able to have protection against earthquakes in order to be able to make sure that everything was covered under this type of traditional, non-traditional format. And the second one is that since parametric is covering the probability, not the asset, you don't need to do a full damage assessment about the loss. And there was a bad situation with the 2017 earthquake in which the loss adjuster was putting a price on the losses, which the INA disagreed, because how much does it cost to rebuild a pyramid? How much does it cost to build an old church? You need to bring, is more about the experts that you need to do that type of a specific work versus the cost of the materials. Parametric doesn't tag or label for one thing or the other. You just get the payout according to the different thresholds that are defined in the contract. If the earthquake magnitude is above X or certain threshold, or the intensity in a specific region is above a threshold, you get a payment and you can use the money for whatever needs you have. So I'll stop here with those two examples of innovative solutions.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question, especially with the first case? I think it's very relevant in the Caribbean and many of our countries. Can you explain what role the property developers, the tourism industry in Quintana Roo or in the other places where you've been building these kinds of platforms under these three pillars, what function do they have in assuring a level of insurance that is going to be helpful in the rapid rebuilding and appropriate rebuilding of the naturescape?
Very relevant question. I missed to say specific their roles. When the trust fund was created, they needed to have a permanent source of income to buy insurance, but also to make sure that risk awareness about not overexploitation of the reef, or risk awareness, avoiding pollution was taking place, and this costs money. What was agreed between the hotels association, the touristic associations, the government of the municipalities, the state government, and the federal government, together with TNC, the Nature Conservancy, and the private sector, was we need to have a permanent source of income. So what was agreed was there's a federal tax in Mexico, a tourism tax that was collected by the municipalities. It's a federal tax, but collected by the municipalities for different purposes of social development, infrastructure, and so forth. They agreed to take a portion of that tax to be transferred on a permanent basis to the trust fund, so the trust fund will have resources, to finance those three pillars, and a strong technical committee of the trust fund that involves the trade associations, the tourist association, the hotels association, public sector, the scientifics of TNC, and the private sector. It's what makes them stronger in order to be able to know what are the activities to be done ex ante, but also once there is an impact, how can we really deploy our capacities, deploy the funds, insurance funds, the self-retention funds, but also have everybody ready to work and rebuild, restore the reef as soon as possible so the economy can get back on track as soon as possible.
I think that's very interesting as a case of partnership, but it's also interesting about, in a sense, the traceability or the transparency in the use of the resources. So they're paying the private sector, the developers, the tourism industry, the hotel association are paying a tax. The tax is not only for infrastructure, a piece is taken out of it, it is put into this fund, and the use of those resources is understood as returning to the economy and to the protection of the buffers and of the protection of the whole environment needed for those businesses as well, I suppose. And then the TNC or other third parties that are involved are contracted publicly through this trust fund, and therefore people can see exactly what is being done with the resources. In a way, just briefly to mention that, as we found many of our client countries, Barbados among some of the first, using IDB guarantees, policy-based guarantees, in order to reprofile their debt and to to gain savings over time from having a lower debt exposure at lower costs on the back of our backstopping or guaranteeing. And then committing those resources to building for resilience, water resilience in the case of Barbados, which is extremely important, a sector that is affected by flooding, by storm surge. And so the engagement of the financing and the ability to track exactly how it's being used, the impact is something that I think the multilateral community, the IDB in particular, is leaning into very heavily. We want to see that the beneficiaries understand how these, whether it's savings that come from a debt for resilience swap, or whether it is tax resources that are going into a fund for resilience, how those resources are being used and how it returns itself to the economy and to the well-being of the communities. So I think that's a really important. I picked up my phone as I promised in my opening comments, not to answer a call from my mother, but actually to receive questions online. We have several really interesting, difficult questions. We have Claudio Osorio has a question for Elizabeth, which would be what disaster risk management capacities should still be developed at the regional rather than the national level. You started to touch on that, and so did Sachiko-san in your responses. But can you give us a little bit more sense of what those capacities are? And I'll take quick notes in case we can be helpful with JICA in providing those capacities.
Yes, thank you. So I'll speak to maybe just two.
Okay.
So, for example, we were talking about the science and the scientific work and technical work. So in the Caribbean, we have regional agencies that actually look at the science of seismic, volcanic hazards, hydrometeorological hazards. This is an area that it just makes sense for us to attend to collectively. So we have single institutions focus on forecasting, the modeling, the scaling from WMO work, etc., and that just makes good sense. The second is actually related to one of the questions you were going to discuss is on logistics. And I think the interesting case of small island states is that we're also big ocean states. So every time we have events in the Caribbean, you have to figure out how do we get across that water to help our neighbors. And we don't have large air or maritime assets in the region. We do have small Coast Guard vessels, some small aircraft, some rotary, etc. But we have to figure out that transport question. And what we have been trying to do as a regional grouping is how to build partnerships. And the best way to do that is actually regional level. So we've been engaging in relationships with private sector. We now have 2 private sector entities on board that support us with relief management and movement of relief supplies, tropical shipping, which zero rates fully for us in terms of movement of relief supplies, and also King Ocean Fisheries. And we have 2 others we're about to sign MOUs with hopefully later on this year. Other partnerships are also linked to the World Food Program. We work very closely with them. And I also wanted to touch on the Memorandum of Understanding, which we signed last year between the European Union and the Latin American, the Caribbean region on collaboration in disaster risk management. And this partnership is actually working very well. And I think it is a space that we can explore more on how we can leverage large assets from across the Americas space to support response efforts in the Caribbean. So those are just 2.
Just 2, but that's quite a bit, actually. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to Sachiko if I can. I had a question about, I had a question that I had written down earlier, and it just flows from what we're discussing now. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, if that's okay. So the global disaster risk reduction community kind of is approaching this stage where it will soon be time to review the results of the Sendai framework that you that you had mentioned earlier, or that actually was Elizabeth mentioned earlier, to draw lessons from it and begin discussions on that next generation of action frameworks. Kind of in the spirit of the question that went to Elizabeth about looking forward, can you give us a sense of what priority actions JICA believes should be taken in the new framework for action from 2030 onwards? And will this panel influence that decision on exactly what's going to go into that priority?
Thank you. It's a very tough question, but we really need to keep discussing on that because we really need to have the clear vision for the future. And first of all, as Elizabeth already mentioned, we really need to invest in pre-disaster, investment. I can give you some example of Japanese experiences that after the World War II, when Japan had to reconstruct the whole country, the government allocated 7 to 10% of national budget to disaster risk management. Disaster risk management infrastructure to reconstruct the country. And even today, the government allocates 1.7% in flood control measures alone. And that really reduced the economic losses and, of course, reduced the human losses. And that is the investment, not the expense. So we need to understand that disaster management is part of the development planning. Disaster management and development planning is not separated, but the disaster risk reduction mindset and the priority needs to be integrated into our development planning of the country. So we really need to have the clear idea how much we need to invest. And in order to do that, we need a good data because we need to understand where we have the high risks and where need to be protected. It's a huge amount of money. So we need to use it, wisely. So we need to have better data. We need to have better idea where the risks are, the high risks are, and what should be protected. And we need to really allocate money for that. And of course, in order to do that, we need to have the good understanding among our communities and public people. When we need to invest, as you said, it has to be transparent. And everybody in the community, in the country, needs to understand that we need to invest in that way. And also, in a national disaster reduction, at the end of the day, it's individual who needs to protect themselves. So we need to have a good combination of national planning, national capacity, regional planning, regional capacity, and individual capacity. So we both need to build the capacity, both at the institutional levels and networking, but also the community levels to have the comprehensive disaster risk management. So we do hope that this kind of aspects need to be taken into consideration in our all planning for the development. And of course, for the next disaster risk management scene, we really need to focus on this needs of the comprehensive idea of investing in infrastructure, investing in people, investing in national planning, and investing in regional or community at level. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for reminding us that the regional planning, the regional response, the national response, and the individual, what we can do at the individual level, they're not in competition with each other. They have to be complementary. And Daniel, maybe in this context, we can get a little bit nerdy with you. And you can give us, I had a question I was going to ask you about technology evolution, the role of artificial intelligence, and what recent advancements in forecasting phenomena do you believe could enhance the quality of forecasting in coming years? And then got a question from the audience, an anonymous question. What are the biggest challenges in making early warning systems more effective at saving lives, to borrow Sachiko's framework of us bringing this down to the individual's level at the same time? Maybe there's a way to kind of combine to talk about the technology, the modeling capacity, the role of AI, and what you see as the biggest challenges, what's still out there that we need to, whether it's getting more data from the insurance industry, or whether it's something more that the multilateral development bank should be doing, that the IDB could be doing, or anything on the technology front that you see that is missing still.
Sure. Thank you very much for the two questions. On the technology front, yeah, I mean, there's an amazing revolution going on right now in terms of new technologies that can really support us in our early warning systems. It's happening fast, as you all recognize, and we're doing our best to stay abreast of it and to make sure that we capture these innovations for the use, for practical use. I mean, obviously, artificial intelligence is sort of the one everyone's talking about, and we see significant advances in how we can do, first of all, data assimilation. So all the weather forecasting models of the world, they need data and they need to ingest a lot of data quickly. AI is really helpful to sort of bring in that data, to filter it, to quality control it, and to really identify what's the key data that a model needs. Then AI, there's huge advancements in actual forecasting through AI. We see this, I mean, I would say at least 10 of the big tech companies have developed their own weather forecasting models at the global scale, and these are performing quite well. So it's really an impressive advance. And they can run often just on your laptop and churn out a result in a couple minutes, whereas the more traditional models take hours on a huge billion-pound supercomputer as they have in the UK, for example. So there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained, but we also want to make sure that there's continued recognition that without the data in the background and without some expertise to interpret the results, you know, we have to be cautious there not to just dump everything into AI and run with it, because AI does sometimes hallucinate, and you do need expertise to interpret what's coming out of the AI systems. In terms of service delivery, I think there's another great area where AI has a key role it can play in translating these forecasts into something that individual users and institutions can use and understand. And that's where AI can pull together data from the hydromet community, from the social protection community, from the finance community, and sort of package it into guidance that can be quickly communicated with all the stakeholders to inform decisions. And I think we see a lot of advancement there, which is quite exciting. So in terms of the second question, I think the two challenges I see, particularly for early warning systems, I think one is there's a lot of the operations and maintenance costs of early warning systems. Governments find it very difficult to finance that. So we go back to financing. We can mobilize capital investments to improve systems through the IDB and many other multilateral partners. But once those systems are up and running, to keep them going comes with a cost financially, also in terms of human capacity. And that's a real struggle all over the world, not just in this region. The other one, and this is where AI could play a role, is reaching that last mile. And reaching that last mile of the most vulnerable people. And a lot of them might not have cell phones, actually. So maybe, you know, the highest tech solutions aren't always the best solutions. But making sure that the information gets to those most vulnerable people in a timely and understandable manner is a real challenge. You can have the best forecasts in the world, but if that doesn't translate into action on the ground, then it kind of doesn't really add much value. Just as a last point, in terms of the previous point I mentioned of finance challenges of operation and maintenance, another advancement that is helping a lot there is, of course, cloud computing, which these days seems like old news, but it really is, in terms of efficiencies and costs, reducing sort of the burden on a lot of the national weather services to be able to run things on the cloud, store their huge amounts of data on the cloud without having to invest and try to maintain a supercomputer, which is a very difficult thing to manage.
Very interesting. And you mentioned in passing the penetration of cell phones or handheld technologies. This is a region that still has a gap to close that we are working on. But as we take notes of the homework that we're getting from each of you, I guess this is something that we have to think about. We have to make sure that we recognize that the technologies that we have associated with more basic forms of communication and the underlying infrastructure needed for that, including electricity, for example, and those basic services and infrastructure are also being expanded to those who might need it most. Might be the same vulnerable communities that we are trying to reach with the insurance, either with the insurance products or with early warning systems, and to help people to react at the household level. So it's a little bit of homework for us that comes from your comments. It's much appreciated and well noted. And since I mentioned the word infrastructure, which is like my personal favorite topic. I have a question that is oriented towards Ruben, and it has the word infrastructure in it, so I'm going to pivot for a second. Maybe we can get back to penetration. You had talked about insurance, low levels of insurance penetration, and we had a couple follow-up questions on that. But since we're kind of on this question about the underlying infrastructure, we did get a question for you specifically, which is how can we expand public infrastructure insurance in Latin America and the Caribbean, and what are the main challenges? So it's sort of an opportunity for you, on behalf of the reinsurance industry, talking to policymakers about what can be done in order to expand public infrastructure insurance, or maybe within the industry if there's something more that needs to be done.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think definitely, I already talked about risk awareness, which is very important. Right incentives are also very important. Tax treatments, tax benefits in order to be able to buy insurance. There's a good example about initiative that is being developed in Mexico City. To give you an example, property tax insurance for homeowners. What we're trying to do as an insurance industry is try to convince the city to embed insurance into the property tax. Meaning, right now, what the city is providing to everyone is if you pay your property tax on time, you already get a discount on your property tax. Let's put an example. You get an 8% discount. What we're telling the public officials is, don't give a full discount. Let's put an example. Don't give the 8% discount. Give a 3% discount, and let's use that 5% to give them insurance. So people, just by the fact of paying their property tax on time, they will have already access to insurance to their homes. And this is a win-win situation because everybody will be protected. We gain diversification by that. We not only covering bad risks, we are covering all the risks. You got a large scales, economy of scales. And when there is a major event, everybody is protected by insurance against earthquakes, against fire, theft. So this is a good example of right incentives and also being able for people to be protected. Another one about public infrastructure, a good example is the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. So the small Caribbean islands struggle to buy insurance by themselves because it's difficult, they are small, they don't have any type of diversification. When they join this pool, you immediately get economies of scale, the admin costs are much smaller, you benefit by being a member to getting a much better price on your risk. And what CRIF does is that they are pulling all together and buying reinsurance to cover the entire portfolio. What they do, they collect premium from each and every island or each and every Central America country, because it's not only Caribbean, also Central America. They create a retention fund within CRIF to pay, once again, for those more frequent, less severe events that is too expensive to transfer to the reinsurance industry. And then they buy and they keep some money to buy insurance in excess of that retention. So this is a very efficient way of covering and protecting public infrastructure, protecting public assets against the hurricanes, earthquakes. In this case, they have three types of perils: hurricane, earthquakes, and excess of rain as a proxy for flood.
This is great. The last question I went to get was actually from my communications lead. It says, why can't you please wrap up the session now, because the time is running out. She put it more nicely than that. But actually, your point about the catastrophic risk insurance facility, the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility, and your listing of the three areas that they cover, brings us back to one of our important points. I'll just highlight it in a little small way, and then run through very quickly some of what I've heard, and with apologies for not being able to find some way to capture everything. It's been such a rich and rewarding conversation. I have a whole page of homework for our institution to follow up with each of you and with our client countries on. So you risk, the last one you mentioned of the catastrophes covered by this facility was flood risk. But when it was conceived, we didn't have the data or modeling capacity in order to cover for flood risk with any kind of parametric response. And so we're in this, and now we can, right? So it was originally just wind damage, and it was triggered by wind speeds. Now the world is changing. The world is changing. I think as Elizabeth laid out for us in the beginning, not only are things getting worse, more severe and more frequent, but also our capacity to learn and our capacity to respond and to anticipate is improving. And this was a great example of that. So that's one of the things that I've learned from you that I wanted to highlight. This is, I think, underlying a lot of what Daniel was saying, and a very incisive point that Sachiko-san made was that if we think about this, the investment in this data, the investment in the systems, the investment in the training, and in the infrastructure required to be more resilient as, I think you said, investment, not expense. So we are valuing the opportunity cost of not doing this. Then we can fold this into our development planning. This is incredibly important for a development institution, but for our countries and for the people who live in those countries that are so susceptible to these events. We heard about incentives and the importance of having the right incentives so that all the participants that need to be involved in the market are working towards risk management rather than disaster response. And we talked about the importance of having data-driven, importance of being impact-oriented, addressing the regional, the national, and the individual without prejudice, and making sure that our early warning systems, as well as our response capacity, is available at all of those levels. It's been a great panel. I think I'm a minute and a half over. I owe you each a minute and a half. Thank you for your patience and your forbearance, and thank you to this extraordinary panel for this hour and a half.
Thank you.